Well, speaking of Stu Ross, he's not here, is he? No, he's not.
Spirit.
Yeah. I showed him this. I wrote this little. What do you call it?
A haiku.
A haiku. Couldn't remember the word haiku. Oh well, getting old. I showed him this. I wrote this little haiku and I showed it to him, and what a funny guy! He just made a little book out of it. It's just amazing. And he wrote a beautiful little. He drew a beautiful little picture here and all kinds of copyright things. Product and for more info about Talk on the Muga or Proper Tales Press, email Stu Ross, blah blah blah. It's amazing. Anyway, here's the haiku. Why do we worry? We're merely leaves on a tree. Let the tree worry. Okay. Yep. They're leaving already. Oh no. Yes. Okay. This is from Be Calm Honey, a book of 129 sonnets, which came out in. When did it come out? Oh.
2008, I think.
2008, something like that.
Yeah.
Anyway. Okay.
Yeah.
On average, we're only dead for 52 years. Then we live again, says my friend Claude. We'll plunge anew into the world's grey goo, from port of entry into port of call, until we learn to see with ear and heart that nirvana and samsara have similarities in some way that transcends breathlessness. It's all spelled out in the Something Sutra. You're received by glum hobgoblins who will review your story from birth to death, torture time. But all is understood and forgiven, just like clockwork over in a flash. You can be Kubla Khan someday, my dears. No need to make a choice for 52 years. Okay. Yes, let's see now. Children will remind us that learning to walk is a bigger deal than learning to play the oboe. Over and over again we fall and get up, each time getting closer not to fall. Looks painful, but it's fun. The distance from the ground is slim, and did you ever wonder what baby fat is for if not for cushioning? A good fall will elicit a pleasant giggle. Occasionally there will be a teary outburst, provoked by imagination more than pain. For you can't always laugh when you're falling, even if you know you're in a little danger. I never cried except to manipulate, and now and then when I was at the movies. Yeah. The Luftwaffe sank 4 ships in Liverpool Harbor. Auden was writing his Spirit Orgulus poem. John Lennon was a baby 2 days old. Marshal Pétain on the radio was insisting the French must learn to differentiate between their friends and their enemies. He urged collaboration with the Nazis in rounding up French Jews for deportation. Born Anastasia Wolochadiuk in Manitoba, Sister Demetrius that day entered Alberta's novitiate of the Sisters' Servants. Over the years she prayed for peace and studied the sacred scriptures in the Ukrainian tongue. She died this year at the age of 87. Like lots of us, the box jellyfish feeds lazily on small fish and crustaceans, but its tentacles trail 9 or 10 feet long. Swimmers, you'll be sorry if you touch one. Also notable are its 24 eyes. Unfortunately, it doesn't have a brain. But with such vision, what need is there to think? Or would you prefer a giant brain and no eyes? 16 eyes are merely pigment pits. but 8 blaze 8 times brighter than the human eye. For its feathers one might wish to be a peacock, but there's something about being a box jellyfish. I think I'd like to have that blazing vision, but when would I have any time to think? There we are. Virginia, the Romanian electronics engineer, called her pup, for unknown reasons, Beauty. She was coming down with Beauty under her arm. At the ground floor, Beauty and Virginia got out. I was in the hobby. I saw them get out. Virginia put Beauty down and we chatted about how Beauty was the best thing in her life. We looked around and Beauty disappeared. Virginia was having a fit, and so was I. We tried to figure out what could have caused Beauty to vanish like that, leaving us trembling, paralyzed with panic and indecision. We finally found her on the 14th floor, waiting for the elevator to open.
Oh.
It's an entire high school football team in full uniform with cleats, helmets, pads, marching single file along Yonge Street, then disappearing down the Eglinton station. Like something out of Fellini. Across the street, I had a perfect view, but everyone else was busy shopping and didn't give a hoot if the players had to pay their own fares. I've been waiting for my friend Selecki. He quarterbacked his high school football team the year they won the provincial championship. His school in Niagara Falls wore red and white. My school in Hamilton wore red and white, and that Fellini team was wearing red and white. Forever so long ago, you always were an oddball, with nasty jokes that only you could dream up. In fact, they were so painful, it's a wonder no one punched you in the nose. Such strange behavior. It's as if you chose these jokes to torture your friends over and over. We torture everybody we can't deal with, as if they wouldn't have given us the world. Don't ever forget how fond we were of you, while making sure we gave you plenty of room. And no doubt you had your moments when you lavished more generosity on yourself than you ever did on others, for all I know. And I'm pretty sure I'd know if anyone did. When we were dim-witted kids at school, we had to learn a lot of poetry. Shakespeare was pretty good, except he was awfully hard to understand at times. Yeats and Keats sometimes penned a good line, but most of what they wrote seemed fraudulent. And why did we have to memorize Shelley, who was always dramatizing the obvious? The teachers used to say it was bad and sad that Canada didn't have any poets. And so we vowed that we would become one. Seemed like a noble thing to do. And if Canada needed us, we'd be there to forge a nation with our perfect lines. The Earth's a grapefruit the Earth's a grapefruit rotting in the sun. The maggots that infest it have been evolving and have been testing tiny nuclear bombs not strong enough to cause serious damage. But a holy mountain cave dweller nearby predicts the imminent transfiguration of the human race and its unholy descent. If maggots can get along, how come we can't? The people who believe in so-and-so's theory won't get mad when their neighbors disagree. But why should China hit the bloody roof because Tibet wants to remain aloof? Perhaps the human race is not the greatest. Perhaps the maggots will exterminate us. That's not all of 129, but yes, indeed. Here's another thing from Stuart Ross, Hard Scrabble, Little Magazine of Poetry, 2009. And a couple of little, some very nice poems in here. I'll just read you mine. That's the kind of guy I am. Yes. Number 9 of Normal Brain Sonnet. My head is on the other side of the room, while I sit here with a book in my hand. What Remains by Krista Wolf. It's good. All of a sudden I can't read a word of it. Where my head used to be, there's just a cloud. What the heck, I think to myself, what gives? I look around and all of a sudden I see it, sitting on a mat on the floor by the door. Thank God I found it. I couldn't live without it. That'd be even worse than losing my wallet. I didn't even have to go and get it. As soon as I found it, it came back to me. It took its time floating back and repositioning itself perfectly on my neck. And there's one other one I might as well read since it's on the opposite same page. Have you ever heard of old-timers' blessings? Mother's been much better since she passed away. We'll be here at midnight visualizing death, or trying to. We never know what's true, though she was a great admirer of Paul Robeson, as if she hoped to see him when she died. At least we finally come to the conclusion that time does not exist on planet Earth. Praise the Lord, I haven't had asthmatic problems since I declared the past an illusion. I think I'll never have another attack, but something worse will probably come my way, like having my penis bit off by an ostrich. Or being dunked in acid till I have no face. Let's see what else is written here. Oh, yeah. I remember now. Okay. Here's one for Greg Curnow. We all know Greg Curnow, long dead but still alive in our hearts. The death of Greg Curnow. What a painting that would make, the death of Greg Curnow. Huge epic panorama, the size of an airport billboard, the size of a doorbell mural, larger than those billboards along the Malecon in Havana, Cuba, saying, "C for Cuba," often translated as "Sigh for Cuba," or "Esta Tierra es 100% Cubano." Even Fidel admits that's a whopper. Large enough in other words to say, without embarrassment, here is a death worth considering, worth paying attention to. Here is a death to ponder deeply the drastic end of a life to be inspired by forever. I knew Greg Curnow. He was a friend of mine. He was my best friend, but many felt he was their best friend. Everybody who knew Greg thinks of himself as having been Greg's best friend, which is the way it should be. Greg was like that. He cared for me, everyone knew that. When I was suicidal in 79 and semi-suicidal in 77, he went way out of his way to help me, and now he's gone. I must have had a premonition, because a month before he died, I spent an afternoon in his studio, embarrassing him by telling him how much I loved him, how great a human being he was, how magnificent an artist he was, how much I valued our friendship. Who could ever have imagined a poem or a painting with the title, The Death of Greg Curnow? Who could ever have imagined Greg dead? Butterflies or belugas going extinct, but Greg dead, never. Greg would outlive everybody. He'd still be cycling and painting well into the 21st century. And then at a highly advanced age, with his work behind him, with all his best friends dead, even his grandchildren all grown up, his heart would quietly stop pumping as he watched Bugs Bunny on TV and saying, "Hey Sheila, come and look at this. Gee Sheila, this is really good." I would do the painting myself. It would be large, of course, of heroic dimensions. I would paint it in the Jack Chambers style, like Chambers' view of the McDonald-Cartier freeway. Even though Greg Curnow died in early November, I would paint it while listening to Holly Cole singing, "I'll be seeing you in every lovely summer's day." You would see the 13 cyclists arranged in 2 ranks, entering stage left across the canvas, riding along a quiet, peaceful southern Ontario, tree-lined 2-lane highway, in a few yellow leaves on the trees, maple leaves of course, because they're maple trees, and it's symbolic of Greg's love of his country. In the distance, far off the side of the road, a barn floats in the lake of early November floodwater. It really isn't floating, it's an optical illusion. All the cyclists are looking at it, are looking at it. They are looking off to the side as they ride over this little bridge. Then in the upper left-hand corner where the road crests a little hill, you see a pickup truck, and the driver is also looking off to the left at the magic floating barn. Both to the left and the right of the road, the fields are flooded with water. The driver is transfixed. He's been driving all the way down from Barrie. It's 10 in the morning. There is a chill in the air. The sky is full of death. Greg has been at the front of the rank. It is his turn to go to the back. He is falling back. The cyclists at the front are bracing for a steep hill coming up. The sky is full of death. A few angels have covered their eyes with their wings. The sky fades away into infinity. Floating here and there in the sky dimly are some of Greg Curnow's most famous paintings. But if I painted the painting myself, it would be a terrible mess. I can't even draw. We couldn't get Jack Chambers to do it because, although Jack Chambers was Greg Curnow's best friend, Jack Chambers has been dead since 1978. And besides, what painter would paint a painting from someone else's mind? Maybe we could get John B. Boyle to paint it, because John B. Boyle was also Greg's best friend. He would be even better than Jack Chambers, because Chambers is dead, Boyle is alive. He wouldn't mind painting a painting out of somebody else's mind, especially since it's probably in his mind too. It's in all our minds. Although it might not have occurred to him yet, and he could paint it in the Chambers style, or even in his own style if he thought it more appropriate. I'm walking around El Museo Nacional de Bellas Artes in Havana, Cuba, and wishing I could remember exactly, while examining the extensive collection of Greek vases, the Titians, the self-portrait of Sir Joshua Reynolds, the painting showing Negroes in foolish situations, what Greg had to say about the painters of the Revolution. Many look as if they had been more inspired by Greg Curnow than he by them, or them by anything else, and I am trying to remember what Greg had to say about the work of Eduardo Abela, 1889-1965, Emilia Pelaez del Caso, 1896-1968, Victor Manuel Garcia, 1897-1969, Maria Pepa Lamarque, 1893, Mirta Silva Herrera, 1904-1986, Jorge Archie, 1905-1956, Mariana Rodriguez Alvarez, 1912-1990, René Portocarrero, 1912-1985, Gilberto de la Nuez Iglesias, 1913 Servando Cabrera Moreno, 1923-1981, Angel Acosta Leon, 1930-1964, Manuel Amandava Mhoyo, 1944, Gustavo Acosta Perez, 1958, Beep, beep, beep. In every little gallery of the museum, an elderly woman snoozes on a hardback chair. And as I enter, she gets up and keeps standing, sees my camera, and without my asking, gives me carte blanche to take all the photos I want of whatever painting I'd like to photograph. And as I leave each little gallery and enter the next one, the woman in the previous one sits down and resumes her little siesta, and the one in the new one wakes up and stands up and starts telling me I should feel free to take pictures, all the pictures I want, whatever. And she doesn't even mind if I use a flash, though I wouldn't think of it. I fall in love with the paintings of Jorge Archie, and they take great pains to photograph them, because no reproductions are available. Nobody knows anything about Jorge Archie. I wonder if Dulce Maria Loinaz the poet, who is 92 and lives where she has always lived, in a beautiful house in the Miramar section of Havana. I wonder if she knew Jorge Arce and maybe even was in love with him. He is so handsome in his Autorretrato, 1935, or as Mi Mujer y Yo, 1939, or as Primavera Descalzo, 1940. And his paintings are so melancholy and simple. And Dulce Maria Loinaz is so beautiful in the beautiful photo taken of her in 1947. Her poems are so melancholy and simple. After all, she knew everyone. Federico Garcia Lorca, 1898 to 1936. Juan Ramon Jimenez, 1881 to 1958. Gabriela Mistral, 1889 to 1957. She must have known Jorge Arce. No info on how Jorge Arce met his end, but he was even younger than Greg when he died. And maybe Dulce Maria Loinaz was as bereft at the death of Jorge Arce as we all were at the death of Greg Colonel. And so I planned to go to the Canadian Embassy and ask them to arrange for me to meet Dulce Maria Loinaz, who is in her 90s and has beautiful long hands, according to the singer Odure Ortega Atan, who went to her house and sang for her, along with other members of the Cuban National Choir, when Senora Loinaz won the Premio Cervantes in 1992, but I get sick and stay sick until I have to return to Toronto. And I feel as if all the paintings Greg ever did, all the magnificent installations, all the heartbreaking watercolor sketches, all the miraculous pen and ink drawings, all the brilliant rubber stamp canvases, all the funny things he made both when he was a kid and when he was all grown up, all the little rubber stamp notebooks he made, all the photos he took, all the bicycles painted on plexiglass so they cast a shadow like real bicycles, all the portraits of his friends and of Sheila, Owen, Galen, Zoe, the various family dogs, cats, birds, the views from his studio windows, all the paintings he wanted to paint but never got around to it. All this huge collection of stuff follows me around wherever I go, just outside my field of vision. I can feel it there, stretching out in all directions, away from me. I can't see any of it, but I can sense it being there like space, surrounding the planet on which we briefly live. And then on the way home I remember that Greg had been in Havana in November 1988 at the invitation of the Cuban government with a group of poets and painters from London, Ontario, including Christopher Dudney, who said Greg seemed very awkward in the foreign environment of Cuba, which wasn't surprising. He often seemed a little awkward on his visits to the foreign environment of Toronto. Greg's wife Sheila was there too, and she said Greg filled 2 fat notebooks with strange observations, mostly about his feeling terribly awkward in Cuba. But somehow the notebooks got lost during the trip. Greg searched everywhere for them, but they were gone. And one day in Cuba, Greg recovered from his awkwardness and took a bicycle up into the hills overlooking the beaches east of Havana, Santa Maria del Mar, for instance, and did some lovely watercolor sketches of graceful palm trees by the sea. And these watercolors go very nicely with his little watercolor sketches painted along the shores of Lake Huron and Lake Erie. And I'm sure he must have realized as he stood there painting in the hills, overlooking the beaches east of Havana, being careful not to get sunburned, wearing sunblock and a floppy straw hat, maybe feeling a little homesick on November the 17th, 1988, 4 years, minus 3 days before his death. Just 2 more little pieces, smaller pieces, let's say. Walter's mustache. Getting close now. When she met Walter for the first time, she touched his mustache lovingly and said, "Oh no, you haven't grown a mustache." "No, Grandma," I said. "That's Walter. I'm over here." Her mind had sparked back, it appeared, to her first husband, who'd been dead 60 years. In his photos, he had a mustache, just like Walter's. She'd been married 50 years to her second husband, but her mind had its secret flashbacks to her first. And her second entered the room as if he'd been reading minds again, and began speaking of her first husband, what a good man he was, although they'd never met, how he was a pacifist, and never would have fired his rifle at another man. He told people before he left for France in 1917 that under no circumstances would he ever shoot at another human being. He could speak 7 languages. He only went off to war because he didn't want to humiliate his parents by having everyone in that little Yorkshire town think he was a coward. And he was shot down in the first minute of the first battle and was killed. Tears were streaming down the old man's face, and it occurred to me he'd be dead soon, as when he died, husband one would be in heaven waiting. Smiling with a reassuring handshake, "You have no idea the dreams you have when you're in your 80s, said my grandmother. People who have been dead for 60 years appear, and you can see them so clearly you can almost reach out and touch them." And she reached out again to touch Walter's mustache. Her dim eyes said she was thinking of husband one again, and I wondered if husband two realized it, and if it made him sad at all. No. By the time you've reached that age, you've absorbed in your life so much sadness, a little more sadness wouldn't affect you at all. They've witnessed the century to end all centuries, and yet still the seasons change. Sadness accumulates and makes us wise, and we die to make room for the young, who are really the same as us all over again, but in a different disguise. And there's just one more here. A simple little thing called "After Reading Shiki's Poem About the Dead Dog Floating Down the River." Why do humans live so long? The dogs I knew in my childhood are all dead. The cats, the birds, and even that big black horse I used to ride on Uncle Cecil and Aunt Clara's farm is dead. And the farm is now a subdivision. And Uncle Cecil and Aunt Clara are divorced, but they're still alive. And the children I played with are living quiet lives here and there, and I imagine them fat, unhappy. And while I'm asking childish questions, how did I manage to be born in the 20th century? And why did I used to wake up at night afraid to die and hating everybody? What happened to all that poison that was building up inside me? It's 2:30 in the morning, and on the street below, a man is trying to break open the newspaper vending box to steal the quarters. And whenever a cruiser goes by, he stops bouncing the box up and down and pretends to be buying a paper. And then there's Shiki, dying at 35, his stomach bloated with persimmons, sad because he knew he would never read or write another poem.
Oh, yeah. Your little book is there.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks.